The other thing is then you're driving into work, feel like the old Arsenio Hall, like I'm flying in from Cleveland this morning.
Nice.
And it hit me. This market is never, ever not going to be about Jimmy Garoppolo. It does not matter what the situation is. All roads lead back to Garoppolo because here we are. Think about it. What did we talk about before I left? What did we talk about on Monday? Garoppolo.
Yeah.
Because Joe Montana seems unaware that Jimmy's not on the team. Next day, morning roast, Brian Baldinger. I think their best option might be Garoppolo. I'm sitting here going, he's not on the team.
Yeah.
Why does everybody keep saying this? And then, then we get to today and a Jay Glazer comment that kind of, sort of, maybe might be parenthetically related to Jimmy Garoppolo.
There's buzz out there that Jimmy Garoppolo could have played in the NFC Championship game.
No, but so it's not that. Like, they were hoping kind of more for the Super Bowl, but even so, he wouldn't have been able to do everything. Kind of would have been able to do a little bit more than Purdy was able to do at the NFC Championship game. But they were hoping he was going to be able to be, and there was maybe the emergency third.
Okay. So
right,
they're hoping to be ready for the Super Bowl, but even then he wouldn't have been okay. He could do more than Purdy, which is to say he had an arm that was attached to his body. So that's good. And here we are ripping Garoppolo for not being ready.
They were hoping that he would be there to be an emergency third,
which they don't use anyway.
Thank you, Mark. They don't use an emergency third.
If they needed an emergency third and they really went into this game going, we want an emergency third, you could go sign an emergency third.
Right.
There's plenty of people sitting out there who could have been your quote-unquote emergency third.
Before Trey Lance got hurt, was Brock Purdy active on game day as the, quote, emergency third?
He was not.
He was inactive. And then Trey Lance gets hurt, Jimmy Garoppolo becomes a starter, Brock Purdy is activated. And did they have an emergency third active on game day?
Not active. No,
they didn't.
They signed somebody named Kurt Benkert, and they hid him on the practice squad.
Right. He was not active as a, quote, emergency third. And then Jimmy gets hurt, and Brock becomes the guy, and you sign Josh Johnson. Did they have an emergency third active?
Well,
I don't think they did.
Now, here's the other part of it, though. Even if, and this is my opinion, even if we meet you halfway, 80% down the road, even if I go all the way there to Jimmy was like 60% of himself, and therefore you could make the case that he's even better than Josh Johnson, 60%. I don't know.
Right.
And let's say, yeah, you would have had to tough it out, dude. It wouldn't have felt good, but hell, you did that last year. Like, your arm was barely attached last year, and you went through the playoffs. So could you gut it out? Here's what gets me. It's sports, so it's different. Yes, you're asked to be tough. You're asked, as gurus, to go out there and be tough. You got to go out there and be tough. So I understand it's a little different. But all of a sudden, in moments like this, we ask athletes to be company men. I don't know. But if we did that in real life, you'd have the respect of none of your coworkers, none of your friends, definitely not your family. Being a company person has a very negative connotation to it. You are supposed to stand up for yourself. You're supposed to be about your family, your future, what's out there for you within the framework of the job you hold. If Jimmy Garoppolo were to go out in this situation, no franchise tag available, no contract at all.
Exactly.
It is about to be ripped up the second the 49ers lose. His contract is over. Plus, you've got the story in your hip pocket of what has happened 6 years to this point, where you've already essentially been booted out the door with a foot twice.
And you've been a company man already. You've played through injury already.
If you had come to me in that situation and said, Jimmy, I know you're hurt. And so I know that this would be dangerous, in fact, to put you out there against Hassan Reddick.
Career threatening.
However, we might need you in a pinch to help us, again, get to a Super Bowl. If I were Jimmy Garoppolo, I would have laughed that idea out of the room. And in fact, I could easily make the case that you are a fill-in-the-blank word if you were to say yes. You would have been a total weakling, totally unable to stand up for yourself if you had looked at Kyle Shanahan in that moment and said, Coach, I'll be there for you. You're putting your entire future.
It's a risk. It's a risk.
It'd be a terrible decision.
Well,
and if I were Don Yee, I'd have screamed at you.
The reward is you come in that spot. Let's just say they had him active as QB2 or QB3. You come off the bench and you lead the Niners to a victory, and then you go to the Super Bowl and you win it. There is a great reward to doing that.
True.
But the risk is far greater than the reward. And I'm with you in terms of Jimmy Garoppolo and his contract. If Jimmy Garoppolo had 2 more years on his deal at $25 million a year, I think you could look at Jimmy Garoppolo in a different way because you're already taken care of. You're under contract. At that point, you can be what you're describing, which is a company guy. But at that point where you're already down in the football game, and before that, I guess Jimmy Garoppolo would have had to declare himself able to play.
Yeah, this would have to be pre-game.
Exactly. So he's pre-game ready. And so would you rather have Josh Johnson at 100% or Jimmy Garoppolo at, I don't even know, 70%?
I don't even know. Who knows?
80%? Who knows how bad his injury was at that point? But I'm with you in terms of Jimmy Garoppolo and criticizing him because nobody would have foreseen you would lose not 1 but 2 quarterbacks and you'd have to bring Brock back in with an inability to throw. It was a perfect storm of disaster for the 49ers. And as we mentioned, they've never dressed 3 quarterbacks anyway. So for me, it's not a Jimmy Garoppolo issue. It's a Kyle Shanahan issue.
By the way, Deebo Samuel had some things to say about this on First Take. We'll have that for you in a couple of minutes. But also, you mentioned the risk-reward thing. I think it goes even deeper than that. You're right, there's a reward if he were to come in and win the Super Bowl, but he's sitting there thinking, not only would I need to do that, which is already super hard. You're telling me I got to get thrown into a game where I wasn't part of the game plan.
Haven't played in 10 weeks.
Haven't played in 10 weeks, and I'm going against the Eagles pass rush. And by the way, if that works out well, now I got to go against either the Chiefs or the Bengals in a couple of weeks. Is the reward there if you were to win that? Yes, but what are the chances that you'd be able to do that against elite competition and you're compromised? You're compromised.
Right.
This is already an immobile player who, in theory, would have lost a healthy portion of the very little mobility that he has in the first place. So you're inviting hits. You're inviting hits when you're already hurt. And I just think if I were Don Yee and this conversation came to my phone and Jimmy was on the line, Don, they want me to play. The competitor in me really wants to be out there. I know it's unlikely that we're going to go, but what do you think? They want to know if I can be ready to be the emergency guy. If I'm Don Yee, we're not having a long conversation. Jimmy, thanks for letting me know. I'm going to call Kyle. You stand down, and I'll circle right back to you. And then I call Kyle, and I go, no. Click.
Right.
That's it. The risk reward is terrible. It's a terrible bet.
It's way more risk than there is reward. I agree with you there. And like you said, what he owes to the 49ers is next to nothing in terms of the way this whole thing's been handled. He played through injury last year. He led you to the NFC Championship game, in which, by the way, he played hurt. He was hurt against Dallas. He was hurt against the Rams. He played through it because he wanted to be a Super Bowl winning quarterback. He's a competitor like anybody else, but then you come this year and he gets put on the kiddie field, as Bonte calls it, and you get shuttled aside, but nobody wants you. And so now you realize that you have to come back. The Niners need you, and you need the Niners because nobody really wanted you. So you sign a deal that is really kind of player friendly in terms of no franchise tag, no ability to keep me unless I want to stay here, and you get hurt again. And at that point, Brock Purdy shines, and so you realize you're not going to be back with the 49ers, yet you get to a spot, NFC Championship game, and, well, maybe Jimmy could play. He certainly would have been ready for the Super Bowl. That was the thought in terms of him being QB2.
I don't know about certainly. I don't know.
Well, that was the speculation. So if we're speculating that he would have been ready for the Super Bowl, maybe, then why are we speculating that he could have been ready for the NFC Championship game?
Because
Jay Glazer aside.
Yeah.
And Jay Glazer, he's not a doctor. He doesn't know how how much pain Jimmy Garoppolo was in.
He's dialed in on what the 49er thinking was. Again, just to hear what Jay said one more time.
There's buzz out there that Jimmy Garoppolo could have played in the NFC Championship game.
No, but so it's not that. Like, they were hoping kind of more for the Super Bowl, but even so, he wouldn't have been able to do everything. Kind of would have been able to do a little bit more than Purdy was able to do at the NFC Championship game. But they were hoping he was going to be able to be, and there was maybe the emergency third.
Okay, so they were hoping for the Super Bowl, but even then, he wouldn't have been able to do all the things that he would normally be able to do.
What Jay was saying is they thought that he would be able to do more than Brock was able to do after Brock lost his arm.
With no arm.
So
in other words,
Jay is saying,
Jimmy had an arm.
Jimmy would have been able to take a snap and maybe not move around at all, but actually throw the football down the field. And what Jay doesn't say in that answer is anything about Josh Johnson. And so that, to me, is where this whole thing falls flat, because he's not saying that Jimmy immobile would have been better than Josh Johnson at 100%, because Josh Johnson was a full go. Whether or not he was very good is a different question, but Jay says nothing about Josh Johnson, because that, to me, is where this question lies, because there is no emergency third. The Niners don't do the emergency third. Most teams don't do the emergency third. So you're asking the team to say, you know what? I got a feeling that Brock Purdy's elbow is going to get ripped out of the socket and Josh Johnson's going to get concussed. Hey, Jimmy, are you good enough to at least be in uniform just in case, even though we never have a just in case guy?
Yeah.
It's nonsense.
It is. And it's at epidemic levels, I believe, not just in sports media, but all of us consumers of sports media as well. What I really, really don't like is when we decide that athletes should make decisions that we wouldn't make, but they should do it, because it's for our entertainment.
Exactly.
There's not a one of you that would have made this decision. Stop acting like you're so tough. You're not. There's none of you would have done this. You broke your foot, and you're going to go out there and put all of that in a compromised way on the line for a company you're about to not work for, who's passed on you twice? You wouldn't do that. So don't ask Jimmy to. Oh, but Mark, 120. Don't ask Jimmy to do what you wouldn't do. There's not a friend that would sit over a drink and look at you and say, that's smart. You should put your career on the line for a company you're about to leave. You don't do that.
Right.
That's just a bad bet.
8 weeks after he broke his foot. So whether or not he would have been ready 10 weeks after he broke his foot, which would be this Sunday, that's a different conversation, unfortunately, one that we will never have. But honestly, the team looked at the situation, and they thought Josh Johnson, 100% healthy, hadn't been hurt, obviously, because he hasn't played. The team thought that he gave them a better chance than pressuring Jimmy Garoppolo into playing 8 weeks off a broken foot.
Yeah, as far as we know, yeah, absolutely.